Teaching vocabulary has always been one of my biggest challenges because I want students to go beyond memorizing definitions and really work towards attaining concepts. That's what this lesson is all about. The premise of a concept attainment is that you're going to really work in columns. And so at the top of your two columns, you want to have two words that you really want students to unpack, two words that you really want students to develop a deep understanding, a deep conceptual understanding of. Once you've got those columns, it's time for a little teacher think aloud. So I'm going to take a word, I'm going to talk out loud about what this word exaggerated means to me, why I would put it underneath stereotype and not prejudice. Together as a class, we probably would talk about some examples of exaggeration that lead to stereotypes. Then I would do the exact same thing with the phrase prejudgment as it applies to prejudice. Once I've done that and we've had an opportunity to do a little discussion as a class, I'm going to ask them to start to figure out which category some of these terms go into. So before I put it in the right column, I'm going to ask students probably to turn and talk, maybe do a little writing, ask them, which column do you think it goes in and why do you think it goes in there? I am absolutely more interested in their thinking and their rationales than I am about whether or not it's in the right column, because I know that it's the thinking and the rationales that really is helping students to develop that deeper, more complex understanding. So we will continue this process until I feel like they're kind of starting to get it, and then I'm going to add a third column to this particular concept attainment lesson, because my goal when I taught this was to get students to stop interchangeably using stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. My students were using these interchangeably 20 years ago. They're using them interchangeably now. And so I think it's still actually really relevant. Before we continue on though, I'm going to do another think aloud, give an example, we'll talk about why this is an example that goes into discrimination, and then we'll continue to put cards in columns. But as we're doing this, as the teacher, I've really got to think about my learning purpose here and to remember that my goal in this lesson is to get learners to talk and think, not to get the right answer. So if that's my goal, then I also have to be really aware of what I'm saying. And what comes out of my mouth primarily needs to be questions, and they need to be the kinds of questions that don't focus on right or wrong answers, but really focus on helping students to work through their thinking. So what do you think? Why did you put it in that category? What if I move the card? Would your thinking change? And so I'm going to continue to ask those questions as we work through all of these different cards and decide where they go. We'll continue this until we're ready to shift the lesson just a little bit. I'm going to give them kind of a progressive example where each of these cards connects to one of the three columns. They're going to see all the cards at once though, and I'm going to ask them which column they go in. And then of course, get them to talk about why. Because again, it's the why that's so important. Even if they get it wrong, sometimes it's that non-example or that failure that really helps to propel them forward. So we're going to see what columns they go in. And then in this basic form, the lesson could kind of end right here. You might continue it by having students do a little writing. Maybe this is part of some pre-reading. Maybe they're going to do some talking to each other. Maybe it launches them into another lesson. But I also have been thinking about some lesson variations and updates that might be really interesting to attach to this lesson. So on these orange cards, perhaps you could use an event, either historical or current event, either, which would be really helpful in getting students to think about those concepts. You could ask students to add their own words, they could add their own category, they could create their own progressive examples. I even started to think about hashtags to get really contemporary. Ask them to start paying attention to the hashtags that are around them, and then figure out where they would go, perhaps in one of these 3 columns. And again, maybe it's going to go into a column that they create. And then I was even thinking about the way that using quotes could be really powerful. So whether it's a historical quote, whether it's a quote that's ripped from the headlines, or whether it's a passage from the text that you just read or the text that you're going to read, this could really help students to transfer their understanding and continue to demonstrate a depth of knowledge about these vocabulary words that have now become concepts to them. So I really hope that there is an opportunity for you to try out a concept attainment lesson and help kids move from just defining words to owning them.